Historical Marathon. The best episodes of Naval Legends for those who haven't seen them and those who are keen to re-watch them. At the end of Marathon, we'll publish a brand new episode about Greek cruiser Georgios Avarov. Look for special codes in each and every episode of our History Marathon. As with our in-game daily shipments, all the gifts will be revealed in advance. If you're hungry for more, you'll have a chance to double the haul of gifts through your actions. If we manage to reach a set number of new subscribers within a 24-hour period, we'll double the number of gifts for the code. You can find more information on our website. Don't forget to subscribe, as there are more bonus codes to come.
Welcome aboard the USS Cod in Cleveland, Ohio. She's one of 77 Gatos built. This is SS-224.
The history of the United States submarine fleet is considered to have begun with USS Holland, which was commissioned by the Navy in 1900. Newspapers described her as a perfect weapon, one that would help the Navy to gain decisive superiority in naval battles. The successful operations of German submarines during World War I demonstrated the high efficiency of submarines and thus drastically changed the nature of naval warfare. After the war, the United States studied and adopted the experience gained from Europe and began designing and building submarines to operate in the Atlantic Ocean. However, in the 1930s, the US became more preoccupied with growing geopolitical tensions in another part of the globe.
The fleet submarine was developed through the 1930s basically to combat the Japanese threat in the Pacific. Before nuclear power, submarines are essentially surface ships that can dive underwater for a short time, travel a short distance. We're on the surface more than 95% of the time. Well, the American fleet submarine early in the war is a slow diving boat. Eventually, with a well-trained crew, the fleet submarine can get under completely in about 35 seconds. Clear the bridge, dive. The diving klaxon is fired twice. The lookouts are dropping through the hatches, take positions here in the control room at the bow and stern planes. Using these controls, the boat will take a 7 or 8 degree down angle as the air vents at the tops of the ballast tanks are opened hydraulically. The air rushes out, the water, of course, rushes in the flood ports on the bottom, and down we go.
Specifications of USS Cod. Length, more than 95 meters. Beam, 8.3 meters. Mean draft, 5.3 meters. Displacement submerged, 2,424 tons. In terms of her construction, this sub belongs to the double hull type, except for the aft end, which had a single hull design. Maximum diameter of the pressure hull, almost 5 meters. The submarine is divided into 8 compartments. First, forward torpedo room. Second, forward battery room. Third, control room with conning tower on top of it. Fourth, aft battery room. Fifth and sixth, engine rooms. Seventh, electromechanical room. Eighth, aft torpedo room.
The Gatos are the last of what are called the thin-skin fleet boats. Our pressure hull is 9/16 inch thick mild steel.
For her primary power plant, Cod used 4 General Electric diesel engines with a total power output of 6,400 horsepower.
The American fleet submarine during World War II was incredibly loud. The diesels, of course, they're called rock crushers for a reason. So on the surface, they're very loud. But once a fleet submarine dives and switches to its electric motors, it becomes incredibly quiet.
For her propulsion, the submarine used 4 electric engines manufactured by General Electric with an output of 2,740 horsepower. On the surface, electric motors were supplied by diesel generators. When submerged, they were powered by 2 sets of accumulator batteries, each comprising 126 elements. The batteries were charged by the same diesel generators when the sub was on the surface. Maximum speed, 21 knots surfaced, 9 knots submerged. Range when surfaced, 11,000 nautical miles at 10 knots. Endurance, 75 days. Operational depth, 90 meters.
But you can go deeper. Captain Flucky of the USS Barb said that he had an arrangement with his stewards in the forward compartment. They would let him know when the deck plates were buckling. He calculated that the hydrostatic pressure would compress the hull sufficiently to buckle the deck plates at about 515 feet. Not all captains were as confident as he was in the engineering of the fleet boat. I believe all submariners are heroes, but the heroes among the heroes are the submariners who are going into combat in the thin-skin fleet boats.
The first American submarine, USS Holland, provided dreadful habitation for its crew of 6 people. On early submarines, the attacks of enemy ships were no less dangerous than the possibility of dying from being poisoned by toxic gases produced by accumulator batteries or ammunition detonation. That's why, as submarine construction developed, special attention was paid to the creation of acceptable living and working conditions for the crew. Only, of course, as long as it didn't have a negative impact on the combat capabilities of the boat, which were defined by its purpose. Gato-class submarines were designed for lengthy combat missions in the Pacific Ocean, and their creators tried to guarantee as much comfort as possible for their crews.
Here we are in the after battery of the boat. U.S. submarines were quite luxurious compared to other fleets such as the Japanese and the Germans. We had the advantage of having air conditioning on board. Now, don't get the idea that it was very cool. It was designed mostly to protect the electronic equipment on board the boat. Now we're heading into the rest of the after battery. This is where all the guys got together for their social life. This is where they came to eat their food, to do their studies, in general, just hang out, as there was nowhere else inside the boat that they could go. Often they would show movies in here, and you have to consider this was quite cramped. As you can see, there's only room for 24 guys at a time. With 97 guys on board to feed, there was quite a turnover in guys at the tables here.
Initially, each sailor on cod had his own place to sleep, but with the introduction of new equipment and armament, the number of people on board increased. This resulted in additional berths being arranged over racks of spare torpedoes in the forward and aft torpedo rooms.
War has some strange stories. The COD's second skipper, Caddy Atkins, was a very dedicated skipper. He wanted to make sure that the COD got as many sinkings as possible. And to make sure that he was ready for action, he had the crew put a mattress up in the conning tower beside the periscopes. And he would sleep up there at night so that if they encountered any Japanese ships, he could immediately get up and spring into action and go into the attack. Well, one night, while he was up there asleep, we picked up a 3-ship convoy, and he immediately got up and went into the attack. And somewhere along the process of him calling out ranges and bearings through the periscope, the rest of the tracking party realized that he's up there naked. Well, because it was in the tropics, and even though we had air conditioning, nobody ever got chilly, he decided to sleep without any clothes. So someone suggested that perhaps it would be decorum for him to put something on, and so they called down, and the steward's mates brought up a pair of striped pajamas for him to put on. So Captain Atkins, with his eye still to the periscope, was putting on his pajama bottoms and then put on his top and buttoned it up so that he was properly dressed to sink these ships. Now, no one thought anything of that until 1998, when the COD crew held their very first reunion here in Cleveland. And at the banquet, Captain Atkins was in attendance, and the crew presented him with a brand new pair of striped pajamas. Now, all the wives were just scratching their heads. They had no idea why the crew would give their captain striped pajamas and why everybody thought that was so funny until it was explained to them, the story. So today on the COD, if you stop by the captain's stateroom and look in, on his bed is a pair of striped pajamas ready for the next attack.
Here we are in the forward engine room. As you can see behind me, there are the distilling plants, each capable of up to 1,000 gallons of fresh water a day. Very hot in this compartment. The guys would dry their clothes. It could get up to 120 degrees. These engines do not turn the propellers. Instead turn generators. The noise in here was incredible. There was no way to stand and have a conversation, so to operate the engine room, you had to use sign languages, lights, and bells.
And when the enemy was searching for you with sonar pings, then of course everyone just became very quiet. Machinery was shut down that wasn't needed. Fans would have been shut down. Even the steering motor made noise, so you would switch to manual steering. Now, without power steering, the fleet submarine's helm is going to require 3 men to turn it, one at a time. After 10 or 12 revolutions, you're tired. The second man will take over, and then the third. And hopefully by the time he's tired, the first man has caught his breath and come back and taken over the helm. So it's nice to have power steering unless you have to be absolutely quiet.
The main advantage of a submarine over other ship types is her concealment. For this reason, their use in naval warfare was initially met with mixed attitudes. Some people believed that submarines were a cowardly weapon for those who preferred sneaky and foul strikes to a face-to-face battle. However, submarines were too effective and menacing to just give up on the idea. COD's main offensive weaponry consisted of 10 533mm torpedo tubes. 6 of them were installed in the forward room and 4 in the aft room. The sub carried 24 torpedoes as ammunition. Throughout her career, COD was armed with Mark 14 steam-propelled torpedoes with a contact or magnetic detonator, Mark 18 electric torpedoes, Mark 23 steam-propelled torpedoes.
What we're looking at now is the Mark 14 torpedo. This has counter-rotating props, 4 separate rudders to control the steering and the upper and lower depth control. All of that is controlled by a gyroscope right here within the tail of the torpedo. Forward of that we have the engine. This is where you mix together alcohol, water, and air to create the steam to drive this thing up to 50 miles an hour under the water. Forward here we also have the air flask. In this flask would be 3,000 psi of air. And forward of that is the business end of this torpedo. This is where you would find 750 pounds of Torpex explosive. Early in the war, when these were equipped with the magnetic exploder, we found that they were very ineffective.
The American Mark 14 torpedo has a secret magnetic detonator, which unfortunately we didn't fully test properly. They were prematurely detonating. What was happening is the torpedo would encounter the magnetic field of the enemy ship and detonate too soon. It took about 2 years for the Navy to admit that the problem was the torpedoes, then identify and correct the solution, and then it became a pretty good weapon.
Unlike modern submarines with a ram, on a World War II submarine, everything was done by muscle power and block and tackle. 3,000 pounds. Load tube 2.
Another downside of Mark 14 torpedoes came as a result of their propulsion method. The steam-gas mixture actuating the turbine was ejected outside, and the torpedoes left a clear bubble trail as they propelled forward.
When the bubble trail began to be identified as a tactical disadvantage, I mean, the enemy could locate the position of the submarine by running down its bubble trail from the torpedo wakes, we introduced an electric torpedo, basically a copy of the German electric torpedo. But the Mark 18 electric torpedoes could be dangerous. We were in the north end of the Formosa Straits. We were very busy. We fired 6 of the 8 torpedoes in the after room. We had 2 electric torpedoes left. A routine battery charge was conducted by someone who didn't follow their training. And hydrogen gas built up in the body of the torpedo, and it exploded at the end of the battery charge, causing the 2 torpedo batteries to burn furiously. In fact, they burned like road flares. The crew were able to extinguish one of the burning torpedoes, but the after torpedo room was filling with dense black smoke. They had to abandon the compartment temporarily because the smoke masks they were using began to clog from the heavy particulates of the burning torpedo battery case. While this is happening, the captain sends 2 men running down the deck to open the after torpedo room hatch to vent that dense black smoke. And they're washed overboard by a wave. It's nighttime. Meanwhile, back down in the room, a separate group of crewmen have re-entered the compartment wearing self-contained breathing packs. Their job is to put the torpedo fully into the tube. While they're working in completely black smoke, they can't see anything, they have to work by sense of touch. They realize that the Torpex explosives in the warhead have already begun to melt. They are able to get the torpedo into the tube and they eject it before it detonates. The seawater, of course, puts the fire out, but if they had waited just seconds longer to get it out of the boat, they probably would have lost the cod. So meanwhile, the men in the water, they have their own problem. One of the 2 sailors can't swim. And of course, while the crew gets the boat saved, the captain orders everyone not on duty to come topside, bring a flashlight to help find the men in the water. And the men coming topside realize the boat is lit up like a Christmas tree. And of course, within a few minutes, a plane is spotted on the radar coming straight for us. Now, luckily, it turns out to be an American plane, but the captain contacts the pilot only seconds before the pilot drops bombs on us. So we almost were destroyed a second time in about 15-20 minutes. So sadly, 7 hours into the ordeal, and we're about to dive, and we see one of the 2 men, and we pull him aboard, and he gives us the bad news that his shipmate couldn't hold on any longer. You know, they were 7 hours in the water, and he drowned. So we lost one of our crewmen. But that's life on a submarine in World War II. You know, you have weeks of boredom punctuated by moments of sheer terror.
Avarov was the most modern ship of the Greek Navy, and even among the navies of all the opposing countries, the reasons why she became the Greek flagship are clear.
As was common with a lot of fleets at the time, the relationship between officers and enlisted was not always idyllic. The cup of patience overflowed, however, when for lunch the crew were served this. But Naval Headquarters ordered Avarov to be scuttled on the premise that she was too old to be of military value, and there seemed little merit in giving the enemy a prize of the hero of the Balkan Wars. Avarov survived 5 wars and was originally funded by donations from private Greek citizens, and 70 years later was again rebuilt by donations from the public. Welcome to Athens.
Cod was launched on March 21st, 1943. She was the last of the Gato-class boats built on that slip. The minute she hit the water, a Baleo-class boat was laid down for construction. So she incorporated all the latest battle lessons.
Cod arrived at the Pacific Theatre of War in the autumn of 1943, when the battles for Bougainville Island and New Guinea were in full swing. The Allies were pushing the Japanese forces back, seeking to approach the Philippines. In turn, the Japanese were trying to provide their garrisons with necessary supplies and send transport convoys to the besieged islands.
This is the Mark 40 5-inch 25 deck gun common to U.S. submarines in World War II. These were very desired by the captains by the end of the war. Early on, they had a 4-inch gun, which was not as effective, very difficult to work with. These were a great upgrade because towards the end of the war, we had smaller ships, and these subs actually became gunboats, which meant they came to the surface to use their deck guns rather than torpedoes. The nice thing about the 5-inch gun was you didn't have to wait for everything to get drained out. You just load the shells and start to shoot.
Artillery armament. Mark 40 gun mount. Caliber 127mm. Range 13,000 meters. Rate of fire up to 20 shots per minute. 2 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft guns. Browning M2 machine gun, caliber 12.7mm.
The American fleet submarine carries at least 200 rounds of main caliber ammunition and 400 rounds of 40mm and thousands of rounds of 50 caliber machine gun ammunition. So they're floating arsenals.
No matter how strong a submarine's armament, this alone isn't enough to result in a successful operation. It's important to have all the necessary means to detect your enemy on board, and these should be as diverse as the sub's armament.
We're here in the conning tower of the Cod. It's a pressure vessel above the main pressure hull. It's 8 feet in diameter, 17 feet long. This is where the officers and the approach party would conduct attacks. Up to 11 men would be crammed in this small space during a submerged attack. It holds for us the radars, the sonar, the torpedo data computer, as well as our main steering and the 2 periscopes. The American TDC, or Torpedo Data Computer, of World War II was a marvel of engineering. It used spherical cams to solve spherical trigonometry equations in real time. No microchips or microprocessors involved.
Firing torpedoes while submerged presents quite a complex problem involving multiple variables. Imagine that you need to hit a swinging log with a billiard cue while standing on roller skates at a distance of 30 meters. You're allowed to look at your target only 2 or 3 times with one eye. To solve this issue and make firing torpedoes easier, different countries developed computing instruments. In World War II, the United States achieved the most significant progress in this area.
American machine here, the TDC, takes time out of the equation. So the minute you have the correct solution light, if your data is good, the torpedoes will meet the target in time and space. So the Germans and the Japanese and the British, their machines are saying shoot now. If you shoot too soon or wait too long, your torpedo is going to miss.
In terms of its construction, the Mark IV TDC consisted of 3 blocks that were connected electromechanically. Data was input both in manual and automatic modes. The receiver would automatically read data about the submarine's course and speed from the gyro compass and dynamic pressure log. Crew members would input information about the target's course, speed, and range, obtained with the help of the periscope, sonar, and radar. It was adjusted every 15 to 20 minutes. The TDC would calculate the target's position and automatically send all the data necessary for firing to a gyroscope installed inside the torpedo launcher. This way, the torpedo was able to hit its target, regardless of the submarine's position. The computer made it possible to continuously predict a target's position, even when the submarine was maneuvering, and fire at night or under conditions of limited visibility.
We're going to turn this on and start integrating some data. And what you're hearing is a 1944 computer turning on and accepting the data we've preset in the machine. If we estimate the target's course and speed, we can wait 5 minutes. We're going to bring the scope up. If we see the target in our crosshairs, we know our data is correct. If the target hasn't arrived yet or has passed the periscope view, we know our data is in need of refinement. Either he's going faster or slower. And now let's start firing fish that we have the correct solution. We have our 2 firing boxes right here with the actual firing buttons for the forward tubes and the after tubes. Captain will say standby 2, so we'll turn tube 2 to standby. The spindles engage light comes on. This tells us that the mechanical programmer is now communicating with the torpedo while it's in the tube. When the proper gyro angle is set, the spindles will come out and this light will go off and this light will come on, telling us that tube 2 is ready to fire. So I will wait for the captain to say fire 2. When we hear that command, fire 2, I'll push that button and we'll wait, and the TDC has told us what the run time is, so we're going to wait. We might have our stopwatch to track the time, and hopefully we're going to hear big explosions, and we're going to bring the scope up and see, hopefully, the ship going down.
More sophisticated means of detection and torpedo fire control, combined with their enemy's weak anti-submarine defenses, paid off. During the Pacific War, American submarines sank about 75% of the Japanese merchant fleet. The price they paid for it was a mere 17% of their submarines lost. This means that every 5th sub didn't return to port. Compare this to the losses suffered by German U-boats during the Battle of the Atlantic. 75% of them were destroyed, while managing to sink only 1% of the Allied merchant fleet.
The Gato-class subs were in the thick of the fight early on. Again, being the largest and most capable boats at the time, were given the most difficult missions. On May 10th, 1944, the Cod is involved in her largest combat. She's the last submarine that's able to attack a 35-ship convoy coming to reinforce the Japanese garrison in Manila.
Throughout the night, the sub pursued the convoy, trying to pass its anti-submarine defense ships undetected. At dawn, she finally managed to break through the outer ring and into the core of convoy. where she launched all 6 torpedoes from her bow tubes at the cargo vessels.
The sonar man hears some high-speed screws behind us. The captain turns his periscope aft and sees the Japanese destroyer Karukaya just 300 yards behind us, cutting across our stern, and he flips the periscope into high magnification and realizes there are crewmen on the bridge pointing at his periscope. And so he quickly fires 3 torpedoes from the stern tubes. 2 of them catch the Karukaya in amidships and break it in half.
But it was too early to celebrate victory. A Japanese hydroplane dropped a smoke buoy right next to their periscope, and the sub had to submerge. The boat headed away from the attack area at maximum speed.
We clear the area very quickly, but the firing point is saturated with 100 depth charges within a few minutes. They're going off like strings of firecrackers. The ships are so close to the harbor that they're able to proceed into the harbor safely, and all of the escort destroyers come out to kill the cod.
Cod's captain reduced speed to a noiseless level, 2 to 3 knots, and managed to evade sonar detection. All day the boat maneuvered, turning its bow or aft towards enemy sonar signals, so as to present as small a target as possible for them.
Toward evening, with the batteries running very low, the sonar man hears water hitting the surface of the ocean a few miles away, and the captain says maybe that's a rain squall, so head toward that sound, and he puts the periscope up and realizes it's a heavy rainstorm. So cod surfaces in the rainstorm and gets out of the area very quickly. So that's a typical attack for an American submarine.
The glorious Gato-class submarines, including USS Cod, arguably became the most famous American submarines of the World War II era. USS Flasher was one of the most successful US submarines, with more than 100,000 sunk tonnage credited to her. USS Kavala sank Japanese aircraft carrier Shokaku, which had participated in the attack on Pearl Harbor. USS Wahoo single-handedly destroyed an entire convoy of 4 ships off the coast of New Guinea. In 1943, she became one of the first US submarines to break through to the Sea of Japan. USS Finback recovered a downed pilot, George H.W. Bush, future President of the United States. USS Barb landed a team from her crew on the Japanese-held southern shore of Sakhalin Island. They placed charges under a railroad track and blew up a passing train.
Later in the war, we were sent on a junk mission because the Japanese targets were getting fewer and far between. And Cod was based in the Southwest Pacific. So we were based out of Australia, and our mission was to interdict the Japanese shipping coming out of the South China Sea, the rubber, tin, and oil coming from Malaysia and some of the areas around the Philippines. We participated in a campaign to prevent the Philippines from being reinforced before our reinvasion or liberation of the Philippines. So late in the war, the last patrol, we sank about 26 junks. But we're also very proud of the fact that on our final last war patrol, while we're sinking the junks, we were sent to rescue the crew of the Dutch submarine O-19. The Dutch had a very small but very effective force of submarines fighting with the Allies. Sadly, the Dutch sub O-19 ran up on a coral reef in the middle of the night, and the Cod, unable to free her, had to take the 55 Dutch crewmen aboard for 3 days, destroy the Dutch submarine, and put them ashore in the Philippines, which had just been liberated. The Cod returned to her home base at the end of the month, The Dutch were waiting for the COD crew, and they said, "Tomorrow night we have a thank you party for saving our lives." Well, the next night at the thank you party, they find out the war is over, so it became one heck of a party. Which is why today COD's battle flag carries a martini glass over the name 019 to commemorate history's only international sub-to-sub rescue and that infamous party.
On the last day of summer in 1945, COD set a course for home. After an overhaul, the submarine was sent to the reserve, but in 1951, she was recommissioned. COD served in the Caribbean and around South America for the next 3 years. Then she was finally decommissioned once and for all, and in 1971 was stricken from the Naval Register. 5 years later, residents of Cleveland, not indifferent to the submarine's faithful service, took care of her and turned her into a museum. In 1986, USS COD became a national historic landmark.
We're very proud of the COD because it is very representative of the American fleet submarine in World War II. She's the only World War II submarine to retain both its hull integrity and its World War II configuration. She remained pretty much intact. We were able to add the deck guns that were missing and a lot of the crew habitation aspects. So when people visit the COD, they're going to take a trip back in time to see what we believe is perhaps the best restored fleet submarine.